My name is Kalvig, and I am a former university professor of religion turned gardener for the sin of knowing what a woman is and saying it out loud. In this lecture, I present myself as a non-believer in gender identity, why gender identity should be treated as religion, and how this will help restore sanity to society. So after 25 years in academia, I have now completed a college degree in horticulture, and I'm employed at a local business where I also do janitor work as well as cleaning. I come from a working class background where one was expected to earn one's own money early on, even though a big change happened during my youth. I'm born in 1972, where the working class kids were also expected to attend higher academic education. And so my sister and myself became the first ones in my family to have academic certification to go to university, which we truly enjoyed. She within the natural sciences, me within the humanities. Then I became lecturer at the University of Stavanger and eventually full professor in 2015, until I resigned in 2023 after years of smear campaigns, bullying, vilification and ostracization because of my opposition towards gender belief. I realized with both sorrow and fury that the academy I had entered as a young woman had deteriorated into a place of lies, fears and farce. I would not allow myself to be paid by the sector which labeled me a dangerous and hateful extremist and criminal, and which refused and refuses to engage itself in a meaningful academic debate about the basic tenets of gender identity, ideology or religion, which was and is my claim. I will get to that shortly. Now, I did not have any other job to go to, and I was and am unemployable in the academic sector, for which I have been trained and top qualified. So this is why I had to turn to a completely different occupation. However, I also started a publishing house and published books on the current crazy situation. As a professor, I had of course published several books, been an editor as well as author, led big research projects, and been a much used expert in media on religion, culture, sex, gender, women's liberation, and leftist politics, as I have been active in organizations and politics for 35 years. When I started voicing critique towards gender identity and its consequences, I was blacklisted in media as well as in the organizations. When I decided in 2022 to write a book about the gender belief that is sweeping Norway and the rest of the world, I was still in university, and I originally had a publishing agreement with a large renowned publisher to whom I of course had given detailed drafts and synopsis of what the book was about, and I called it Gender Belief, the Battle Over Reality. But as I developed the manuscript, the publisher became increasingly reluctant and slow in responses, until I had to ask them straight out if this was really a book they wanted to publish. It turned out it wasn't. No other publisher wanted either. I approached them all after the first contract was terminated. So that is why I had to start a publishing house myself to get the message out, and I call it Consciousness Publishing, which sounds better in Norwegian, Levit Forlag. So why is belief in gender identity a religion, and how can the religious perspective be liberating for women and men today? As a scholar of religions, I specialized in new religions and new religiosity, also called alternative spirituality and New Age, and the interfaces between popular culture, media and religion, religious change, bodily religious practices, sex and religion, and more. Therefore, analyzing the tenets of gender identity ideology, it was clear to me that this was akin to the metaphysical claims I had met in various circumstances throughout the decades. And throughout the years, I had defended people's right to hold whatever religious belief they wanted as a basic principle of a modern-day secular society under the rule of law. Whether a statement or claim is classified as religious or non-religious is important, because this determines how it should further be treated in a society governed by the rule of law. Religious freedom is also the freedom not to participate in religion, and religious claims are limited in their scope concerning basic established categories in law and how other human rights are treated. So, relegating gender identity to the sphere of belief will be scientifically accurate. It should function as a wake-up call to all of those who have believed this to be science. It puts the burden of explaining why it is not a religion to those who adhere to it, thus removing their taken-for-granted position as human rights defenders, while securing our respect towards the human rights, namely the right to believe whatever you want, though within the limits of established other human rights. The influence this belief exerts upon the world becomes easier to understand once one realizes that this is part of a religious fervor, a revival movement backed by a vast industrial complex and exponentially expanding since Janice Raymond first described it in 1979, what she in 2021 identified as a global campaign promoting trans ideology and practice. Then how is it religion? Let's start with definitions. Gender identity as the feeling of which gender or genders you are is not a definition. It is just a set of synonyms confirming each other by referring to each other. It is a circular definition spread globally. As such, it is invalid. As a contrast, the definition of woman as adult human female points to facts of age, maturity, and the binary sexed condition of humanity. Identity as a feeling, deeply held or not, is void of information. Further, as we know, this circular definition is used to nullify established factual categories of sex, man and woman, and lesbian and gay following that. As such, we are dealing with transcendent, counterfactual claims, those which transcends the empirical, observable truths. Now, this is where religion thrives and has its birthright. In the Old Testament, for example, God identifies himself as I am who I am when he appears at a burning bush to Moses, and Moses asks him who he is. I am, as the sole answer given, is quite a sovereign name and attitude for one who transcends all limits. Yet, this is actually the naming praxis within the transactivist movement. I am, whatever I say I am, unbound of any boundaries of reality. This is for the transactivist just a commonplace utterance. However, one that unlocks magical powers and limitless access, where the letter of the law is turned into a magical tablet with considerably more far-reaching implications than any religious scriptures. So, this is the holiness of gender identity. It is undefinable, unfathomable, unspeakable. It is mysterium tremendum et fascinans, that is, a mystery that invokes both terror and attraction. It is essence, your true self, ultimate reality, and taboo, all aspects of the holy in studies of religion. It is now entangled in a symbolism of light and darkness, good and evil, life and death, There is thus a religious fervor to its claims where death and rebirth and the human capacity to create itself are pointing to a construction of beliefs where we act as gods, we become gods, and we save ourselves. Gender belief and transactivism march a trans-empirical belief system grounded in the absolute subjectivism and particularism of postmodernism, transhumanism, and contempt for women. This explains its appeal. Gender identity as a detached, reality-denying entity that can exist in the wrong body is clearly an idea that has no basis in facts. As a person, one has certain feelings or perceptions which society says, or you may yourself feel, mean that a part of you, the soul, the mind, the essence, who you truly are, has somehow ended up in the wrong body in truly mysterious way. When it was decided that the notion of being born in the wrong body was not a delusion or a disorder for which relief could be gender-affirming treatment, a shift occurred from the factual to the religious. This is not merely an ideological claim about worldview and relationships that gives rise to political demands. It consists of claims about the structure of reality that are counterfactual, transcendent, and metaphysical. The sociologist of religion, Durkheim, describes sacred things as things set apart and forbidden. The entire queer project promoting the acceptance of gender identity ideology can thus be described as sacred, because a common authoritative reaction when someone wants to discuss ideas related to this project is that it is forbidden to discuss. It is set apart, elevated, and surrounded by prohibitions. If one breaks this rule, it is said to erase lives as dehumanizing rhetoric. In other words, it is portrayed as deadly or as sinful and leading to damnation to want to discuss gender identity as anything other than who you really are and your true self. Ordinary conversation or discussion is therefore not meant to apply here. It is taboo, a religious prohibition against mentioning or approaching something or someone. It is taboo to say that a person who identifies as trans is the sex he or she is, even if one acknowledges that the person identifies as trans. Sex in public registries, such as birth registries, is set aside and forbidden, with the Yoga principles treated as sacred scripture. In the dogmatic Yoga text, gender identity is the most sacred component to be honored. Changing one's legal sex becomes a kind of rebirth, where a new name renders the name your parents gave you a dead name. A dynamic interplay between concepts and ideas connected to life and death, the permitted and taboo, light and darkness emerges. W Path Standards of Care follows up as a ritual manual, demanding medical alteration and castration with no other evidence, in fact, than the belief in a Holy Ghost, a holy component, namely gender identity. Around gender identity, one thus gets a single unified moral community called a church, comprising all of those who adhere to these beliefs and practices. Here, church is meant as a general term for a community of faith, and what unites this community is morality. This is established and manifested through the beliefs and practices that the sacred things gives rise to. Morality and piety here are tied to the individual mind controlling its world across materiality and time. Everyone else must not only accept this, but play their role in relation to what suits the performative mind, while one's own subjective truth must also be performed. Real collectives and collective action, grounded in a material understanding of the world, no longer apply. We become scenery and extras for each other, with our own inner life as divine authority. The religious community surrounding the belief in gender identity thus becomes, at its deepest level, a solitary instrumental project detaching us from each other. Our society is now fundamentally shaped by the religion, the moral community, tied to the sacred object of gender identity. Legal systems, educational systems, healthcare, politics, administration, media, and the public sphere all align themselves with gender identity without questioning, even though satisfactory definitions and evidence are lacking. Gender identity is intangible and existentially important, much as the notion of the soul has tended to be. For many, the soul is an important and beautiful concept. But unlike gender identity, it is not enshrined in legal systems, educational systems, healthcare, politics, administration, media, and the public sphere as a sacred object. The soul belongs to the realm of belief, to philosophy, to art. Gender identity is, on the other hand, universal and is intended to take precedence over all other considerations. Those of us who do not belong to the faith community of gender identity, women's rights activists, for example, are judged as immoral, as fallen, and cruel. Since we are not part of the moral community, we can be threatened with punishment, violence, and death without it attracting much attention. The large majority, after all, belong to the religion of gender identity, either voluntarily and enthusiastically or more passively through proxies. Both the fervently believing and the lax believers see what happens to heretics or atheists, and no one is tempted to put themselves in our position. Then, what about the liberating part? How do we free ourselves from this religious yoke? Knowing whence and why the trans activist takeover, the cult of gender belief, has introduced itself is, of course, very important. I unpack several answers in my book, as do others in other publications, but in this lecture there is no time to delve into the pedophilia, the paraphilia, fetishism, pornography, sexology, the medical, industrial, and financial complex, the transhumanist agenda, and the ever-present contempt for women and for the limits and greatness of life. The logics of the epidemic systemic spread, young women's and lesbians' particular vulnerability, and how many women's organizations have failed disastrously in responding to gender beliefs, also would require more time. Here the question is what belief in gender identity accurately is and how it should be categorized. Yeah, and the photo here showed just two of the gurus in the movement, the Norwegian Espen Benestad and the American Martine Rothblad, who published a book called The Apartheid of Sex in 1995, which was quite fundamental to the movement. Now, gender belief is here and has its own right to exist, even though we conclude it is bad faith and a science, fraud, and medical malpractice. We do not ban beliefs as we uphold freedom of thought, conscience, religion. But we do limit their influence on other people's rights. Thus, identifying gender identity belief as a religion would consequently lead to its removal from legal systems altogether, while simultaneously respecting its right to exist as belief. The anti-discriminatory acts already ban discrimination on the basis of religion and worldview. Thus, gender belief is already protected. As fiction and belief, it must be legally treated as such and not as fact. Hence, Any legal changes made to the correct and objective registration of people's sexes are revealed to be religious rituals that have no place in law. These must be confined to people's gender congregations. Any mention of gender identity in the Criminal Act must be removed. It is both covered and confined by religion, and the Norwegian blasphemy provision was repealed in 2015. The bans on conversion therapy and hate speech must be corrected according to objective reality. A banning of parental and therapeutic guidance relative to any counterfactual belief will be identified as illegitimate. Medical procedures based on belief will be halted. Any bodily harm inflicted on minors based on this belief gives rise to liability for damages and a duty of care and treatment. In our educational systems, teaching and learning about this belief must be allocated to the religious education parts of the curricula and at age-appropriate levels, without interference of gender belief missionaries. The Flag Act must be reverted to its previous form, where flying flags for certain beliefs and religions from public flagpoles again is restricted. Women and men's rights to sex-separate spaces and the measures to secure women's liberation and equality as a sex will be restored. So the point is, forcing the proponents of gender identity to show how the idea is not a belief based on a circular definition will bring clarity. As long as we only speak in the negative, saying gender identity doesn't exist, naming this solely a destructive ideology, the proponents are easily given the arguments that no, it's not, it's affirmative, it is who you are, it's freedom, it's human rights. Well, no, at its core, it is a belief system, and its proponents should be made to recognize the extent to which they have attached themselves to counterfactual and transcendent claims. This means that we are not erasing anything. Rather, we are assigning it to its proper category, thereby insisting that the discussion be grounded in reality. This is not only a battle over rights, language, or terminology. At its core, it is a battle over reality itself. Then, finally, an accident investigation commission should in due time be established to investigate the matter. How society failed to discern belief from fact. How we failed to protect women, children, and vulnerable youth. How we failed to secure transparent democratic processes, and how academia failed in its duty to provide society with evidence-based knowledge, and thereby failed as a crucial pillar of societal preparedness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was completely brilliant. It was very serious, but also hilarious and light-hearted. But I suppose it's, if you stay there, it's fine. It was so many people. I wanted to get my phone out and take photos of the audience here laughing. There's so much joy and delight in hearing that explanation. It's fantastic. So I think partly because you nail it so well, you describe it so brilliantly, and I think we've got a bit of joy because we think this, well, I think it's a step forward. This is a very, very useful talk and insight. Thank you.